Saturday, December 28th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I've seen a lot of stories and headlines about how the economy in the US or in the UK here are going to be going gangbusters, like there's going to be a boom time after Brexit with new trade deals, how President Trump is going to destroy the central bank and bring about a great time of prosperity. But to be honest, I haven't seen any indication or any indications from President Trump's side or from Boris Johnson's side that they're willing to really crack down on the central banking system, to abolish the central banking system, and actually institute a free market in money. A lot of people think that governments need to be behind the monetary system, that governments give money credibility and power and purchasing power, but that's wrong. The only thing governments really have done for hundreds of years is tax people, create wars, trigger wars, yes, regulate people out of business. That's what governments have done. What governments have done is they've hijacked money. They've hijacked many other things like education, transportation, roads. Anything that's good, government has hijacked it. And I want to look at a very interesting article from the Mises.org website, MISES.org website. Mises Institute is an Austrian School of Economics institute in Auburn, Alabama. And I've just read an article by Thorsten Polleit. He's a German fellow, and I've actually been reading his stuff for many years, and believe it or not, he used to work in the financial system. I remember corresponding with him via Bloomberg when I used to be in the city, and he was at Barclays in Frankfurt. But he's written a really good piece for the Mises Institute website, and he talks about the inflation scam, the fact that the establishment, the central bankers, the Keynesian economists or PhD economists that run the system, the politicians, how they've corrupted the definition, the meaning of inflation, which I've spoken about many times in the last few years to some of you that might remember, some of you who are older viewers and subscribers. I've looked at the definition of inflation back in the 70s from my old pocket dictionary. And with that, I'm going to go through Thorsten Polleit's article. It was published on the 24th of December on the Mises website. I'm going to put a link to it below in the description so you can read it as well. I highly recommend the Mises.org website, the Austrian School of Economics. So let's go through it. The article is entitled "The Wealth Redistribution Scam That Is Inflation." So the world over, people are told that central banks pursue price stability by making sure that consumer goods prices do not rise by more than 2% per annum. This is, of course, a big sham, and I agree with Thorsten there. How can it be stable if everything's rising if the value of the money is decreasing by 2% every year? If the price of goods rise over time, it does not take that much to understand that prices do not remain stable. And if the prices of goods increase over time, it necessarily means that the purchasing power of the money unit declines. So I'll continue. As money loses its purchasing power, income, and wealth are stealthily redistributed. Some individuals and groups of people are enriched at the expense of others. Savers and workers are swindled out of their deserved income and retirement benefits, while those who own goods that rise in value or who borrow money typically reap a windfall profit. Clearly, the banking industry is a major beneficiary of money debasement. So far, I couldn't agree more with Thorsten, so let's keep going. Inflation is a rise in the quantity of money. Well, and that's what the old definition here in the Webster Dictionary says, and I'll go through it quickly. The third definition for inflation: an abnormal increase in the volume of money and credit, resulting in a substantial and continuing rise in the general price level. But you look at the definition of inflation today, it's completely different. They say that it's inflation is the rise in prices, not the increase in the money supply and credit. So let's continue. Central banks are the very source of the phenomenon that all prices of goods tend to rise over time. They hold the money production monopoly and increase in close cooperation with the commercial banks, the big Wall Street, City of London banks, Frankfurt banks, Paris banks, Tokyo banks. The outstanding quantity of money through credit expansion, an increase in the supply of credit that is not backed by real savings. It goes without saying that it is rather profitable to be active in the money production business. That's right, and that's why they've taken over everything. The bankers, they've taken over all aspects of society for now. Hopefully that will change, but it's going to take a lot of effort to try to educate people about this. The increase in the quantity of money results, and necessarily so, in higher prices compared to a situation in which the quantity of money has not increased. This is no arbitrary assertion, but stems from logical reasoning. A rise in people's money holding lowers the marginal utility of the additional money unit, meaning that the marginal utility of other goods that can be exchanged against money rises. Basically, the law of supply and demand as well. So the more fiat currency there's around, compared to the increase in real goods, that fiat currency tends to be diluted. It's just like companies doing rights issue when they increase the amount of stock that is available to investors. That dilutes the existing shareholders' holdings because there's more of it. I'll continue. Consider the case in which the quantity of money in the hands of market agents rises. People will then exchange money balances which have, from the viewpoint of the money holder, lost in marginal utility against other vendible items which have gone up in marginal utility. As people exchange money units against other goods, money prices go up compared to a situation in which the quantity of money has not increased. So let's keep going. Next section, the mainstream explanation and its problems. Of course, in real life, additional factors such as, for instance, demand changes, market introduction of new products, etc., interfere with the link between the increase in the quantity of money and the rising prices of goods. This, however, by no means refutes the economic insight that a rise in the quantity of money in the economy leads to goods prices that will be higher than if the quantity of money had not been increased. The increase in the quantity of money is what deserves to be called inflation. So there we go. Thorsten knows the real, true definition of inflation. Rising prices are just a possible symptom of an increase in the quantity of money. Why does it say possible? One of the possible symptoms. Well, because there are other things like new products or demand changes. However, mainstream economists typically define inflation as rising consumer goods prices. This, however, is problematic for at least two reasons. First, by equating inflation with rising prices, the real reason for higher prices, namely the rise in the quantity of money, is obscured. Again, great explanation there. This in turn gives rise to arbitrary explanations of why goods prices may go up. And this is a funny one. Sheikhs who force up oil prices, unions that cause wages to rise, an overall buoyant economy that increases shortages in production factors, and so forth. All these pseudo explanations deflect from the real culprit, the central bank, in cooperation with commercial banks, which issue new money so that people no longer understand who in fact harms them. And yeah, it's not the the immigrants coming over from overseas or from wherever that are hurting you economically or monetarily. It's this monetary system. It's interesting because the other day I watched The Big Short. I've watched it quite a few times, but I really enjoyed that movie. You should watch it as well. And at the end of the movie, Mark Baum, one of the traders that did very well from the collapse of '08, he said, unfortunately, from years from now, politicians and everyone are going to be blaming immigrants and people from abroad for all our economic woes, even though the reason for a lot of our economic woes are set in this fiat currency central banking system. So there you go. Let's continue with the article. Asset price inflation. Second, changes in consumer goods prices do not tell us the entire story, for they do not take into account asset prices such as, for instance, stock prices, housing prices, land prices. That's interesting nowadays, stock prices. However, the newly injected money can be expected to not only push up consumer goods prices, but also drive up asset prices. And like rising consumer prices, rising asset prices diminish the purchasing power of money. In other words, asset price inflation destroys the purchasing power of money in the same way that the price inflation of consumer goods does. Take, for instance, stock market prices. If prices rise from, say, $100 to $200, the purchasing power of the money unit would drop by 50%. The owner of the stock becomes richer, while the holder of dollars become poorer. In fact, this is precisely what has been happening in the last decades, and I agree with him 100%. People who say that the rising stock market nowadays is a reflection of a great economy, I think they need to do a little bit of homework. Most of stock holdings are owned by the top 9% or even top 1% of the population in the US, and I would probably venture to say the same elsewhere. So very few people have been benefiting from this. The people at the bottom 50 or the bottom 90%, they haven't participated in this. So he brings up a chart now. The rise in the quantity of money inflates prices. So let's go through his explanation here. For illustrative purposes, let us look at the charts above. It shows the development of the US quantity of money, nominal GDP, and stock prices from 1996 to the autumn of 2019. In the period under review, US Nominal GDP increased by 4.3% per annum on average. So nominal just means that you're not taking into account the inflation of the currency. The quantity of money rose by 6.1%, while stock prices expanded by 8.1%. To the attentive observer, these numbers contain an important message. The increase in the money supply does not only raise prices of consumer goods, but also tends to raise all prices. For instance, in the period under review, on average, the real GDP in the US rose around 1.9% per year, while prices of goods and services that are included in US GDP went up by 2.4%. The remaining excess money obviously pushed up stock prices and other asset prices, such as, for instance, housing prices. So we're getting towards the end here. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. I really think Thorsten Polleit explains this really well in this article. To conclude, don't put your trust in today's fiat money. And that's what I've been saying for the last few years to all my viewers. The lesson to learn are these. Always think of inflation as a rise in the quantity of money. Beware that central banks and commercial banks provide a kind of money that does not keep its purchasing power, that most people suffer losses when holding it for the purpose of storing wealth. Better not put your trust in today's money and keep your transaction balances as small as possible. Don't be taken in by the inflation sham. Couldn't agree more. That's what I've always said. Try to keep your fiat money balances to the minimum. The insights outlined above should encourage all of us to join the call for better, sound money, money that lives up to the highest economic and ethical standards. This can be achieved by simply creating a free market in money, where people are free to choose the kind of money they would like to use, and where entrepreneurial spirits are free to make their fellow people sound money offers. Couldn't agree more. A free market in money, which would be tantamount to putting an end to central banks' money production monopolies. Yeah, and that's very true. The legal tender laws make central banks a monopoly. It's actually easy to establish. Just strip the official currency of its privileged legal tender status and remove all capital gain and sales tax on all media that stand an excellent chance to compete for becoming currency. Most notably gold and silver, but potentially also crypto units. A free market in money will work wonders. Many of the evils that haunt our world today, be they chronic price inflation, financial and economic crisis, boom and bust cycles, and even overfunded governments and aggressive wars, would be greatly reduced. Yeah, they wouldn't be eliminated, of course. Boom and bust, we've had boom and bust forever. There's cycles, but all that the current system does is accentuate the boom and bust cycles. One of the biggest challenges of our time is to reform our money. The solution is to open up the market in money. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Make sure you share this video far and wide as well. Don't forget, I've put the link to this article below in the description. You can also follow me on Twitter, BitChute, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great Saturday. Take care. Bye.